The air on Christmas Eve, 1914, was very cold. Rain had fallen for many days on the Western Front, turning the ground into deep, thick mud. Now the wind blew from the north, and the temperature dropped even lower. The mud began to freeze. It became hard and sharp, like broken glass. Soldiers felt the cold deeply. Their wet socks turned stiff, and their feet hurt. The smell of gun smoke, called cordite, was strong. It was a sweet, chemical smell that filled the air. There was also a strange quietness, a terrifying silence that should not be there in a war zone. Then a small light appeared. It was a single candle placed on top of a German trench wall. This was a place of war, where any light meant danger. A sniper should have shot it, but no shot came. The candle simply burned, a small, brave light in the dark. It showed the wet sandbags of the German trench, only a short distance away. For weeks, soldiers had only seen mud, barbed wire, and the sad shapes of dead men in this land between the trenches. Now the candle showed something human. It made the enemy seem real. A British soldier watched the candle. His coat was hard with dried mud. His hands were cracked. He could smell the enemy's tobacco when the wind blew. He remembered being told he would be home by Christmas. This promise now felt like a cruel joke. The war had changed. It was no longer about quick marches. It was about deep trenches, cold mud, and waiting. Men lived with lice and rats. Dead bodies often lay between the lines, frozen and silent. This war was the most brutal in history. But on this night, it stopped. Not because kings or generals told it to. It stopped because the men who were sent to fight and die chose to pause. This moment was more than a celebration. It was a dangerous act. It was a rebellion. The top commanders, called the High Command, were more afraid of this peace among soldiers than they were of the enemy army. They feared that the soldiers would not want to fight again. This story will show the secret history of this truce. It will tell how close this mutiny of peace came to ending World War I 4 years too soon. We will explore how simple acts of humanity changed the course of one night. The silent truce, the shared songs, the quiet meetings, they all pushed against the war. The British soldier watched the candle. Suddenly, he saw a shadow move in the mist, close to the German trench. He raised his rifle. His finger moved to the trigger. Will he shoot, or will the silence hold? Chapter 2. The War and the Mud. The British soldier lowered his rifle slowly. He did not pull the trigger. In these cold trenches, a secret understanding often grew between enemy lines. Soldiers called it live and let live. This meant they often did not shoot to kill, especially if the enemy also kept quiet. It was not a rule from their generals. It was a silent agreement between the men, a hidden way to survive the terrible war. They lived so close that they could sometimes hear each other cough. Life in the trenches was truly awful. It had been raining for weeks, turning everything into deep, thick mud. The mud stuck to boots, made clothes heavy, and never dried. Then the cold came. The water in the mud froze, making walking even harder. Fingers and toes became numb from the cold. Rats were everywhere, eating everything. Lice lived in clothes, making soldiers itch constantly. Dead bodies sometimes lay in no man's land for days or weeks, making the air smell bad. This shared suffering made soldiers on both sides feel a strange connection. They faced the same mud, the same cold, and the same danger every day. They often felt closer to the men in the enemy trench who understood their pain than to their own commanders far behind the lines who lived in warm, dry places. Far away, Pope Benedict XV asked for a special ceasefire for Christmas. He wanted all fighting to stop for the holy days. But the leaders of the different governments said no. They did not want the soldiers to stop fighting, not even for one day. They believed peace should not come from feelings. However, the soldiers in the mud were already thinking about peace. This ability to understand each other, to communicate without speaking many words, was very important. It would help them do something amazing later when the time was right. It was a skill born from shared hardship. On December 24th, the sun slowly went down. The air grew colder, and the sky turned dark. A strange new sound began to drift across no man's land. It was not the roar of big guns or the crack of rifles. It was something different, something the British soldiers had not heard in many months. The first song. The silence broke not with guns, but with songs. In the cold night, a new sound came across the land between the trenches. It was singing. Many soldiers at first thought it was a trick from the enemy. They waited, their fingers tight on their rifles. But the songs were too clear and beautiful. They were old songs, like those sung in churches and homes. From the German lines, the carol, "Stille Nacht, Silent Night," came. The British soldiers listened, surprised. Then, from their own trenches, they sang back. They sang the first Noel. It became like a friendly competition of songs. When the British sang, "O come all ye faithful," some German soldiers joined in, singing the Latin words. It was a strange and powerful moment. Two armies singing the same carol together in the middle of a war. More candles appeared on the German trenches. Small Christmas trees also stood up on the earth walls, looking out into the darkness. British soldiers clapped their hands and whistled, showing their surprise and approval. Lieutenant Kurt Zemisch, a German officer, wrote in his diary that it was a wonderful night, though very cold. This cold was different. Not the usual deadly cold of being hunted. It was a shared cold, held back for a moment by the carols. After the songs, a new thought grew. Men wanted to see who was singing. It took great courage. For months, showing your head above the trench meant instant death from a sniper. Now, slowly, one German soldier stood up. His hands were clearly open, showing he had no weapon. Across the dangerous ground, a British soldier also stood. His heart beat fast, a hard, quick thud in his chest. He wondered, will they shoot? Will my own side shoot me? He saw the German's mouth move and heard the words, clear in the cold air. Don't shoot. The moment stretched, terrifying and slow. It felt like an hour, though it was only seconds. This was a huge act of trust. Just hours before, these men had been trying to kill each other. Now they were stepping into the open, hoping not to die. Sometimes officers told their men to keep firing, but often the soldiers ignored these orders, or the officers were not there to give them. The trenches were long, and the night was longer. So the first meetings happened in no man's land,
the most cursed and deadly strip of earth. Now it became a quiet meeting ground. Hands reached out. Soldiers began to trade small things: cigarettes, tobacco, bread, buttons, small badges from their hats. Germans wanted British jam and tinned meat called bully beef. These items were important comforts in their hard lives.
Men who had seen each other only as a faceless enemy now looked at faces closely. They saw dirt, chapped lips, lines around eyes that might suggest laughter. They tried to speak in different languages or used their hands to talk about their families far away. The war had stopped, not because generals ordered it, but because the men themselves wanted peace for a short time. Two men met in the middle of the open ground. They reached out their hands and shook. Thousands of eyes from both sides watched them. In that moment, everyone realized that the war had effectively stopped. 4. Meeting the enemy. Christmas morning brought a strange calm to the Western Front. No Man's Land, once a place of death and danger, slowly changed. It became like a quiet market where enemies could meet. Soldiers, tired and dirty, stepped out of their trenches. They moved carefully towards the middle ground. There they met men from the other side, men they had been fighting for months. They traded small, simple things. British soldiers offered their bully beef and sweet jam from tins. German soldiers gave away their tobacco, shiny uniform buttons, and sometimes even their cap badges. They shared newspapers, and sometimes even letters from home. These objects became like small gifts, a new currency of peace. Men looked closely at each other's faces, trying to see the person, not the enemy. They tried to talk, using simple words or hand gestures. Some men showed pictures of their families. They spoke about their wives, their children, and their homes far away. For a few hours, the war seemed to stop, and they remembered their shared humanity. But the truce had another, more serious reason. For weeks, many dead bodies had been left in no man's land. The freezing mud preserved them in terrible ways. It was too dangerous to collect them before. Now, in this time of peace, soldiers from both sides worked together. They used shovels to dig graves in the cold, hard ground. It was a grim task, but a needed one. They carefully moved the stiff, frozen bodies of their comrades, and even their enemies. They helped each other with quiet respect. A British chaplain and a German soldier who had studied to be a priest stood together. They held a short service for about 100 fallen men, burying them side by side in a waterlogged field. This shared act of respect for the dead showed how alike they truly were. During these quiet moments, soldiers often found they had much in common. One British soldier who was a barber before the war met a German soldier who also cut hair. They talked about their shops, their tools, and the prices they charged. They laughed about difficult customers. This simple conversation made them think deeply. Why were they here, trying to kill each other, when their lives back home were so similar? The war felt less like a fight between nations and more like a cruel mistake. As the special Christmas day slowly ended, a new and exciting rumor began to spread. It moved quickly down the trenches. People said that in one part of no man's land, someone had brought out a football. Soon there was talk of a game, a kickabout, between the soldiers. The idea of enemies playing football together, even just for a few kicks,
gave everyone a sudden lift. It was a strange, hopeful thought that went against everything they knew about war. The ball game. The most famous story from the Christmas truce is about a football game. Many people imagine a big match with teams and a referee on a clean, snowy field. This is how movies often show it, but the real story was a little different, and perhaps even more important. No Man's Land was a very bad place. It had deep holes from bombs, thick mud, tangled wire, and broken things. It was not a good place for a proper football game with clear lines or rules. Instead, soldiers had kickabouts. This meant kicking a ball around through the mud and laughing. They did not play a full organized game. They just enjoyed the simple act of kicking the ball. Sometimes a German diary mentioned a lively game, suggesting a joyful activity. These games, even small ones, were very important. They showed that soldiers still wanted to play and find joy. They wanted to feel normal, away from constant danger. The image of men from different armies playing football became a powerful symbol of the truce.
It was easy to understand. War stopped, and people shared a moment. It was a simple, strong picture of peace. The ball itself was more than a toy. In a way, it was more dangerous to the war than any bomb. When soldiers played together, they saw each other as real people. A German soldier was not just a target, he was a man who laughed. A British soldier was not just a foe, he was a man who cheered. This human connection made it much harder to hate the enemy. If you share a game, it becomes difficult to want to kill them later. This happiness and shared humanity deeply worried the generals. It showed them that the soldiers were becoming too friendly. The joy and brotherhood on the battlefield forced the army leaders to act. They knew this peace threatened the entire war. They had to stop this unofficial truce quickly, before it changed everything. Suddenly, the games and laughter came to an abrupt halt. A British officer received a very angry, urgent message from his headquarters. The message stated that this dangerous time of peace had to end immediately. The generals were furious, and their orders were clear. 6. The angry generals. The generals in charge of the army did not live in the cold, muddy trenches. They were in warm, safe offices far from the front line. For them, the war was a complex plan of maps, supplies, and orders. The Christmas truce was not a happy story. It looked like a serious problem, like an illness spreading through the army.
General Sir Horace Smith-Dorrien, a British Corps commander, had warned about this weeks before Christmas. He spoke against soldiers becoming too friendly with the enemy. He called it "live and let live," and he said it was a great danger. If soldiers became comfortable with each other, they might not want to fight anymore. This kind of friendliness could break the army's spirit. When news of the truce reached the high command, the generals panicked. They did not see a miracle of peace. Instead, they saw something very close to a rebellion, a mutiny of peace. An army needs its soldiers to hate the enemy to fight well, but the truce had made the enemy seem human. Soldiers had shaken hands, shared jokes, and even played football with the men they were supposed to kill. This directly threatened the general's control and the entire way the military worked. If soldiers could decide to stop fighting on their own, the whole war plan was at risk.
so very strict orders were quickly sent out. All officers were told to make their troops stop being friendly with the enemy at once. There would be no more unofficial ceasefires or meetings. Any soldier caught fraternizing or being friendly with the enemy could face a military trial called a court-martial. The punishment for such actions could even be death. Sir John French, the British commander-in-chief, also demanded action. Officers were told to make sure their men had an aggressive spirit again.
A big question hung in the cold air. Would the soldiers actually obey these new, harsh orders? Would they really shoot the men they had just shared a Christmas carol with or kicked a football around with? The generals knew that the soldiers had now looked into the eyes of the enemy and seen another person. Forgetting this would be very hard. To stop the news from spreading, the generals also ordered the checking of all letters soldiers sent home. They did not want the public to know about the truce. If people at home found out, they might stop supporting the war or ask why it was still going on. The generals were determined to end the peace. They gave a chilling order to their artillery units. At a specific time the next morning, the guns were to open fire on the trenches. This was meant to force the soldiers back into war. The quiet, friendly truce was about to be shattered by the sound of bombs and bullets. 7. The end of peace. The peace could not last. The generals had made their decision clear. The orders were very strict. The war must begin again. For the soldiers, this was a heartbreaking end to their short truce. Some units did not want to shoot their new friends. They fired their guns high into the sky. This was a silent message, a warning. It told the German soldiers, "Go back to your trenches. The peace is finished." The Germans understood and often fired a single shot back, showing they knew. Then they went back to their side.
But not all units could do this. Officers stood watch, making sure their men followed orders. Soldiers were forced to aim their rifles. They had to shoot to kill. This was a terrible moment for many. Just yesterday, they had looked into the eyes of these men. They had shaken hands, shared cigarettes, and laughed. Now they had to act like enemies again. This made killing much, much harder. The enemy was no longer a faceless idea. He was a person they knew. The soldiers had seen the enemy's hands, heard his voice. The generals wanted them to forget this. The war machine had ways to crush this unexpected peace. Generals moved the soldiers who had made friends to different parts of the front. They brought in new troops. These fresh soldiers had not met the enemy during the truce. They had not shared Christmas carols or played football. For them, the men on the other side were just targets. This rotation tactic was important. It stopped the friendly feelings from growing stronger. It helped to bring back the hate that the war needed. The generals also used other methods. They made sure artillery and small attacks started again. This made no man's land too dangerous for anyone to meet. Snipers watched for any sign of friendship. Strict rules were put in place. Any soldier caught talking to the enemy faced serious punishment. The old rhythm of war, the gunfire, the danger, returned. The generals wanted to stop the live and let live thinking that had started among the men. They feared this thinking more than they feared the enemy. Slowly, the battlefield became loud with war sounds again. The silence of Christmas Day was gone. The air filled with the familiar smell of burned sugar and metal from the cordite.
the muddy ground was once again a place of death, not friendship. Then a final, sharp gunshot rang out. It was a single shot that cut through the cold air. This shot was not just a warning, it was a final signal. It marked the end of the Christmas truce. The short peace was over. The cold reality of war had returned. 8. The memory. The Christmas truce of 1914 was a very special and rare event. It was like a miracle, needing a perfect mix of things to happen. Soldiers were still new to the war, remembering their homes and families. The trenches were very close, letting men hear and see each other. Everyone suffered from the cold and mud. These conditions never came together again. As the war became longer and crueler, armies changed. Generals gave strict orders against talking to the enemy. Soldiers were moved to different parts of the front often, so they could not make friends. Artillery guns fired more and more, making peace impossible. The war itself learned how to stop any future truces from starting. For many years, the story of the truce was not widely known. Army leaders tried to keep it quiet. They saw this event not as a good thing, but as a dangerous mutiny of peace. If soldiers saw the enemy as human, they might not want to kill. This could stop the war machine. So, letters from the front were checked, and news of the truce was often hidden. They wanted soldiers to hate the enemy to keep fighting. But the memory of the truce lived on. It was shared in families and private writings. Over time, it became a legend. People remembered the songs, the shared cigarettes, and especially the football games. Sometimes the legend became simpler than the truth. It became a comforting story about human goodness. It showed that even in war, people want to connect. Many people have asked, what if the truce had spread to all parts of the war? Could World War I have ended much earlier? The truth is that the war was a very big system, controlled by governments and generals. The truce was a short break, a pause. It was not a real solution to the deep reasons for the war. It did not change who would win or lose. So even though it was powerful, it could not stop the fighting for good. Still, the Christmas truce proved something truly important. It showed that even in the muddy, freezing trenches, where men were told to kill each other, humanity could still be found. Soldiers made a choice, from below, to share peace. They sang, they exchanged small gifts, and they worked together to bury the dead. They saw the enemy's face, not as a monster, but as another man. This was a powerful message from a place of great suffering. It showed that the desire for human connection can live even in hell. The memory of the Christmas truce makes us think, if soldiers could find moments of peace and see the humanity in their enemies during a terrible war, what does that mean for us in our lives today when we face conflict? We would love to hear your thoughts in the comments.
Hey there! Just a second before you go. If you learned something new today, please give this video a like, write your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel. It only takes a second, and it really, really helps to create even better English videos for you. Your support means the world. Thank you.